Hi, Laura. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Jared.
Mm,
Hi, everybody.
Sweet to meet everybody like this. So, there's a few people on this call that I think haven't met us, and we thought we would start by introducing ourselves. So, my name is Jared Franks. Um, I currently have a private practice as a therapist in Sydney, Australia, although most of my clients are international on Zoom, just like this. And I teach and mentor, and I'm a director of the Leela School of Awakening, which is a non-profit education organization that trains people to be therapists and really teaches people to be a true friend in the world, and has a purview of world peace and freedom. And so how I got there really actually was through depression. And it was depression that led me to finding an answer to it. And in finding an answer to it, I found what I love. And now I want to share that with the world. So, welcome.
So beautiful. Thank you, Jared. And I'm Laura Shaw, and I live in Golden, British Columbia. And I too have a private practice, really supporting people through mindfulness and self inquiry. And I went through the Leela school, and so I'm doing Leela therapy as well. And that's where Jared and I met. And I'm so excited to be sharing these tools and practices because, really, for me, in my experience of depression, which I've experienced all my life, these tools were really, they continue to be the linchpin of completely changing my experience of depression. I don't even call it depression anymore. And we'll get more into that as we move into this webinar. But I also want to welcome everybody. Such a deep, warm welcome. There's lots of people that I don't know, and then there's also lots of people that have popped up from all areas of my life, friends and family and colleagues and students and teachers, and it's uh it's such confirmation to me that we are not alone in this. There's 50 of us on this call, 50 of us registered for this course. So maybe next time, when you need it, to just remember that there's so many of us navigating this together. So welcome.
So, how we'd like to start um, really is to start at the beginning, and actually, the beginning is silence. It's the beginning and the end. It's to be able to be with yourself just for a moment without doing anything, without trying to fix yourself, without trying to get over yourself or get over your experience, but actually to just be with yourself. And so we're going to sit in silence for just 5 minutes. And and I would say it's a necessary first step to just be able to sit with yourself. And there's nothing to do. It's not like a practice. It's not, you don't have to observe your thoughts, although you can, you are naturally, but just to do nothing and see how much can you do nothing? How how effortless can you spend this next 5 minutes? That's the challenge. So we'll ring the bell when the 5 minutes are finished. Thank you, everyone. How was that for you?
Mm, lovely.
Mm, yeah.
So we thought that since there's so many of us here, and Jared and I can't presume to know where anybody is at with this kind of content, we thought we would just take a couple minutes each to just offer a bit of an orientation to what we mean by mindfulness and what we mean by self-inquiry. So I'll start with mindfulness. And sometimes I think it's good to start with when we're not mindful. So just consider when there's something difficult in your experience, whether it's a situation or challenging emotions or a mental state that moves in. When we're with difficulty, what usually happens for most of us is our attention jumps into the control seat. So we really move into naturally trying to fix or manage, trying to protect ourselves, trying to get better, or maybe we indulge it. So we're actually disconnected from the experience that we're actually in. So with mindfulness, we're deliberately using our attention in a different way. We're really pausing and taking stock of what's here right now. So it's clearly seeing what is here, what emotions are here, what thoughts are here, what's going on in your body, what's going on around you. And with this seeing, we're bringing a quality of interest and non judging curiosity. And this is the tricky part. So, this is the part that it can be learned. I teach courses on awakening self compassion because it's not our nature to observe discomfort in a non judgmental and compassionate way. So, mindfulness to me is seeing clearly with a quality of kindness. So then there's the possibility of responding with so much more, we're so much more informed. So we can really respond from a wise and compassionate place. So that's my how I've been using mindfulness personally and how I teach it, how it's become really powerful for me is remembering, can I see what's here? And can I see it without judging it?
And so, where self inquiry comes in is when first you have to be mindful of what is it that I'm thinking, what am I feeling, and be in touch with it directly. And then you can start to question what is the structure and the story that I'm telling. And what I discovered um, in my awakening out of depression was that the pain that I was feeling was always related to a story that I was telling about me, about Jared. That all my effort to be better, to fix myself, to be different, it was all about this character called Jared. It was all about identity. And I needed first, I didn't call it mindfulness at the time, but I needed this capacity to see myself, to actually stop for a moment, stop telling the story, to observe the story, and to see that the emotions that were running were all emotions that were resulting from the story I was telling myself. And so, in seeing that, I was then given this question of who am I? I was given a mirror to say, what if you actually stop for a moment telling the story of who you are and actually inquire, am I who I think I am? And who am I if I don't tell a story? And who is anybody if I don't tell a story? And what's really here? And so it was kind of to me, self inquiry is a process of telling the truth. And to tell the truth, you have to be mindful. You have to stop and observe and then say, wait a minute. What if everything isn't as it seems? What if I'm not who I think I am? And in that, a kind of underlying reality is exposed in that inquiry.
Mm.
And so that's what, to me, self inquiry is, asking the question, who am I really? Am I really my thoughts? Am I really this person that I think I am? And what happens if I stop telling that story? And what's here, unchanging, unmoving? What's always here? So we'll get into that in more detail a bit later. But that's my little synopsis of self inquiry.
And I just want to put it out there that these tools aren't linear. It's not like you need to practice mindfulness and then move into self inquiry. But just for the purpose of this webinar and for expressing it, it was kind of the easiest way to do it. But Jared and I often find that we're moving into each other's terrain here because it really isn't linear, and there's so much inquiry involved in mindfulness. And then we can also use that mindful gaze within self inquiry so we can see even more, really reconnect to our depth.
Yeah, very well said.
So we thought that the way that we would do this today is we would each spend about 15 or 20 minutes just sharing our process and some of the tools or insights or practices or questions that have really helped each of us. And I love that we've rooted this webinar within our own experience. So we just hope that the intention behind that was that you can really feel our connection to this. It's coming from something really personal, and I think there's a potency in that hopefully will allow you to find something in it useful that you can bring into your own inquiry that can help you unravel it as well.
Yeah, I think we're going to use our own stories as teaching stories,
Yeah.
uh, as the to show how it's possible. It's possible to actually um, wake up out of depression, and we don't want to talk conceptually about it, and we don't want to lecture you about it, and really, even we don't even want to teach you. We actually want to invite you to check out for yourself. If what we're saying is true for you.
Yeah, that's it. So I'm going to start with some mindfulness pieces, but Jared, please feel free to jump in at any point. Absolutely. Um, so if you have been experiencing depression for quite some time, you likely have quite a repertoire of strategies of how to manage it. And you might just right now consider what they are. Like for me, it's been a lifetime of managing. So diet and looking at exercise, and am I connecting with people, and supplements and medication at certain points, therapy. And all these things are beautiful, and keep doing them if they're working for you. We are not for a second saying stop doing what you're doing. Because if those things are serving you, if they're serving you and helping you, then absolutely, and keep talking about it. But at some point, if you're still caught in it, and caught for me, there was something in my self worth. I felt really inadequate because depression would come in. And so there was this sense that it was a flaw. And it was something that I very carefully managed and hid. And, my strategies were like, I'd throw myself into academics, or yeah, exercise for sure. And so I could kind of hide it. Although people who knew me really well know at some point it was still here. And it's like that quote that Einstein, I'm probably going to horribly paraphrase it, but if you want a different result, you need to try a different approach. And so this for me has been the different approach. So I just want to give a few things that have really, really helped me, in conjunction with all the lifestyle things that I'm already doing that you're probably already doing. So the first one is meditate. The first one, really sitting quietly, like we did at the beginning of this call, just coming back to yourself, bringing your attention and your energy back to yourself in a quiet way, listening to your breath or just being quiet. It's so nourishing for your brain. So we know that in depression, neurologically, we're in a really triggered state. And so by meditating consistently, even 5 minutes a day, we start to just bring our brains back into a more grounded, coherent state. So we're less likely to have those huge fluctuations in the day. So I wanted to put that out there. I don't often speak about actual meditation because I usually focus on the engaged inquiry that we can move into in our day-to-day life. But I did want to put that out there that it's so nourishing for every aspect of your life to just take time to sit quietly. So, in terms of what do you do? What do I do when I notice that this system, and I think of it as a weather system, is starting to roll in? So, this may be foggy, dark, sludgy, overwhelmed state. And the very first thing, and it goes with what Jared said, being able to tell the truth about it. So instead of managing it, which is what I do, that's almost the first symptom is seeing my reaction is to quickly dig in and manage. So it's really resisting it. It's saying, this is wrong. It shouldn't be here. So now when I see myself doing that, that's when I can catch it and say, okay, this is what's here. So the very first is to name it. And and I don't call it depression. Get more specific. How do you know that it's here? So what's going on in your mind? What's going on in your body? Really start to name specifically what's here. And it might sound counterintuitive because we want it to go away. But there's something so freeing about just telling the truth. It's like, these are the cards that you're holding today. Just naming what's here. So, in that, because for me, I've noticed that there's so much self attack that can come with this state, that moving right away into self compassion. And this has been a learning process for me. This did not come naturally, but it starts with this commitment to non attack. So, can I see what is going on here and be kind? And there's some great literature out there on this right now. Dr. Kristen Neff, she writes a lot about self compassion. She wrote a book on self compassion, and one of the takeaways from her research was that touch, by offering yourself some gesture that communicates support and presence. So even if mentally you're not quite there yet, if mentally you're still on the self attack train, just by bringing in a very supportive gesture can remind you to be kind even as you see this self attack. The ways that you feel like, for me, it's like the world's too big for me, or I can't contribute. I'm not worthy when I'm in this state. And I think this is so common for all of us who struggle with depression.
I remember Laura in our mindfulness and beyond course we did last year that you spoke about a technique that you used where you imagine someone who you really respect or love is looking at you, and how would they be seeing you? And I
Yeah.
really like that. Maybe you can talk about that for a second.
Yeah, and this is all part of self-support and resourcing ourselves when we're in a challenging moment. And so imagining someone, your best friend or your pet. You can imagine a pet, anything that you can imagine just looking at you with such loving eyes. And you can even switch places and imagine what they see. And they're not seeing what you're telling yourself from the inside. They're seeing something different. So being able to expand your perspective, or you can imagine, what would they say to you in that moment? If they were sitting with you right there, what would that presence feel like? It certainly wouldn't be an attack. And if it is an attack, pick a different ally. Yeah. So we've got, and I just want to keep this, I'm keeping this experiential in the sense that I'm moving through really what I do. So no matter where I'm at, if it's the very first symptom that this system's rolling in, which for me is usually fatigue, I'll feel like I'm just a bit overwhelmed and tired. So I might catch it there, or I might not catch it. I might deny it or try and repress it, which makes it bigger. And I might catch it the next day when I'm feeling really down, but it doesn't matter where we catch it. It doesn't matter. That's the beauty of this work. No matter where we are, no matter where we are ever, there's always the possibility of stopping and saying, okay, what's here? Offering compassion inwards as we look. So key. That's the piece that unraveled it for me. So,
I'm
yeah,
curious, Laura, if there's some kind of way that you stop being a victim in that moment where you start to observe yourself and be mindful of what's going on, that there's some movement away from being a victim of the storm, of the weather that comes in.
yeah,
Suddenly now you're maybe you're the weatherman, you're observing the weather rather than
yeah.
being caught in the storm.
Yes. And this is such a good point. I'm so glad you asked that because I'll catch it by seeing it. I do feel like I'm the victim. And so sometimes, this might not work for everybody, but for me, a loving humor is so effective. It can't be mean, it has to be loving. But so if I can catch this and being the victim, it's so disempowering. It's such a scared, kind of untethered state. But if I can catch a thought that says like, oh, I can't do anything or something like that, I might repeat it like, oh, you really can't do anything. And it's just with this kindness, or so it's almost amplifying that victimhood. So I can really see it, and as soon as I see it, as soon as I name it and even interact with it in that way, and that's a whole other inquiry. It lessens the identification with it, or even just asking, is that really true? So if I hear that, I can't contribute anything, I'm not, whatever the thought is, just saying, okay, do we know that that's true? And deep down, there's always this connection to, no, it's just how I'm feeling right now. So if this is a process, there is a practical piece here that can be useful. So naming it, and then immediately and very deliberately, because this takes practice, it's not natural, moving into self-compassion. So that needs to be, that more than anything is the practice here of saying, okay, whatever I see, even if I don't like it, I'm just looking, I'm observing, almost like an anthropologist dropping down into Laura's experience and what's here, what can be seen. And then from there, now that the compassion has been sort of, we're rooted in it, it's offered, then you can explore a bit more in this mindful inquiry. So now that I'm not attacking myself, I might look and say, okay, well, what is this? How bad is it? So it's really this willingness to see it all, and what can I see that I didn't see before? Like often there's quite a bit of physical pain for me with depression, which I never saw before because I was so busy fighting it that I didn't relax enough to see, oh yeah, I'm actually like everything's quite tense. And right away, just in the seeing, something starts to soften. And I might notice more about my reaction to it, the ways that I try to push it away or manage it. Or I might be able to see, what was there a trigger to this? When did this start? Was there something? And again, we're not trying to fix, we're just seeing the big picture. And then finally, once you've inquired mindfully everything that you can possibly become aware of, to just be with it fully. And this is a threshold that we don't usually cross. It's like we don't want to touch the enormity of it, but by allowing ourselves to be with ourselves as we are, there's such a peace that can come from that. There's such a relaxation and a deep unconditional self-acceptance that then if there is any action needed, if there's any action that needs to happen, it can come from this very self-loving, informed place. And we're much more, in my experience, I'm not fighting it anymore. It's like I'm back in touch with my essence, with my true self.
There's a kind of, I think, an essential paradox here, or seeming paradox that you just really brought up, Laura. That there's a feeling that there's something wrong with me, and in fact, that feeling is so painful and uncomfortable that there's a sort of secondary feeling that if I open to this fully, if I actually allow myself to feel it fully, if I surrender to it, it'll somehow be true. It's like if I feel like I'm a monster, if I want to try to get on top of that, change that, ignore it, get away from it. And the sense is, if I actually open to it and feel it fully in all the cells of my body, that somehow then I will fall into this kind of black hole of there's something wrong with me, and thereby, in a way, making it true. And and the paradox of that is that we make it true by avoiding it, actually, because it's like the boogeyman under the bed. It's that when we sit on the bed and we say, it's not, don't worry, it's not there, it's not really there, but we secretly believe it's there, then we make it real. And only if we go under the bed and shine our torch and actually put our head under the bed and face the monster, then we can realize, oh, okay, it's not so bad, it's not really true.
Mm.
It was just a story I was telling myself. And so ultimately what we want is, we want to feel like I'm okay and there's nothing to fix here. That's really what we want. That's maybe the antithesis of depression, is I'm okay and everything's okay and there's nothing I have to do. And so I think what we're saying, and what you're alluding to, Laura, is that you can actually surrender now, even if it feels like you're not okay,
Mm.
and go straight to I'm okay, by allowing yourself to be exactly as you are, to totally open to whatever it is you're feeling. And in that opening itself, you are actually sending the signals out into your body mind that I'm okay.
Mm.
Even with depression, I'm okay. Even with fear, I'm okay. And so that surrender itself is what we're looking for. We're looking for, I'm okay no matter what. And so it's, you either try to work on yourself until you feel okay, but you can't do that, because by working on yourself, you're saying I'm not okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes,
So
I love this. And I think we have the capacity to bear everything. And yet our tendency is to live within this little window of tolerance And so even emotionally, so once we start to go outside of that, we're very uncomfortable and we're discomfort adverse. We live in a discomfort adverse culture all around. And so in mindfulness, by just being with it, it's terrifying at first, but we're increasing our tolerance to that discomfort. And in that, we're learning what we are capable of bearing. And once we realize that actually, if we are just with it, and this is the thing with depression that I've noticed in myself and with clients and friends, that when we just are with it and not trying to fix it, but just with someone in the fullness of what we are, and that doesn't mean that it's comfortable. So I want to put that out there. There might be very deep emotions. There might be a lot of fear. There might be, it might be just feel so huge, but to just be with it and not, as you say, Jared, we're not trying to fix it or chase it away, but keeping it company fully. There's something so healing in that we can do for ourselves and for others navigating this.
That's what we want from others. We don't want others to come and tell us what to do and tell us how to be happy. And we just want them to be present with us. We just want them to actually bear us, even if we are uncomfortable for them.
That's it.
And we all are uncomfortable for each other in some way. And life is uncomfortable for everybody. Life is not ultimately comfortable. And if you do find comfort, it will be for some period of time until something uncomfortable will arise again. So it's also good to know that you're not the only one, and that generally the way our parents teach us is to find a way out of discomfort, to either suppress it, ignore it, or indulge it and complain about it really, and resist it, and to tell a story about how this particular type of discomfort makes me special.
Yeah.
and and the good news is you're not special. None of us are in that way. We're all uncomfortable. And but then you see what's the difference between resisting the discomfort and avoiding it and trying to fix it and change it, and what's the difference to just open to it and surrender to it and even invite it and
Yeah.
say, come and get me all the discomfort in the world, and see how much you can bear,
Yeah.
and you may surprise yourself.
Yeah. Not making it wrong and not making yourself wrong, but really in that very raw and vulnerable opening to it, to just be with it and see what it is. It truly is such a doorway I've experienced, but we can't tell you this so you just know this. It's something for you to experiment with on your own. But when we open to that without fixing it, there's such a deep, deep peace that can come from that. So I'm grateful. I can honestly say that, like you said in the beginning, Jared, my journey with depression has it's really led my life in a lot of ways. And now where I'm at with the clarity of what I've been through and what I continue to work with, I am so grateful for where it's brought me.
Hmm. Thank you, Laura.
So I'd love to hear, Jared, from you about self-inquiry and how that has really helped you.
Well, I think there are really two ways. One has got to do with actually just waking up from this trance of ego, this self perpetuated story that we subconsciously and consciously tell ourselves every day. In the morning we wake up and there's a moment where we don't know who we are, and that moment is actually, if you inquire and be mindful about that moment, you'll find an infinite space of not knowing and bliss. And then we seek orientation and we seek meaning. So we then say, okay, what's going on? And the first way to find out what's going on is to say, who am I? And in that, we actually start to build a false identity through a story. We actually remember what we did yesterday, maybe something embarrassing, maybe nothing important, maybe something wonderful, whatever it is. And we start to recall who we are and rebuild and reincarnate actually this identity story that that is the core of our experience, and we then see the world through our identity story. So that if we think we're a wonderful person and everybody loves us, then naturally that's what we see out in the world. If we think everybody hates us and I'm a terrible person, then we can find all the evidence to back that up, but that's the lens that we see the world through. So for me, what happened was when I was in school, and I had a wonderful time in school for the most part. I was a bit depressed internally and secretly. Nobody knew about it. But and that worked on some level because I could go out of the house and I could socialize and I could perform at school
Mhm.
and be fairly what we would call normal and healthy. Secretly, I was very afraid and anxious, particularly socially. Um, but externally I could fake it well enough that I actually had a great childhood and a great time at school. And but what was happening that I didn't realize because I wasn't mindful at the time, it took me until my 30s to really see what was going on, was that I was performing and making a lot of effort to be likable and to be lovable so that people would like me. And I did okay with that. I did pretty well with that at school. But as soon as I left school, it's like that era or that period was over, and I was back to square one. I was now out into the real world, 18, 17, 18 years old, and I was at the bottom of the heap again. And I just saw this kind of mountain in front of me of what kind of effort I needed to make to get people to like me again and to perform and to succeed. I had to go to university. I had to get a job. I had to be successful in all these arenas that I learned from my parents and my society. And to be honest, it was all too much for me. And I just thought, I can't do it. And not only that, but I thought, what's the point if you're just going to lose it again? Because there I was in school, and I succeeded, and I had love, and I felt I had succeeded in my arena, in my community. And then I left school, and it was over. And the lesson I learned from that is you can't rely on anything that you achieve. That nothing's reliable, and that you could succeed and build up love and relationships, and that at some point they'll all finish and they'll leave you and you'll be left with nothing again. And I thought, well, what's the point? And this was the beginning of my depression. It was really based in, what's the point? There's no meaning to all of this. What is the point of life? And when I went to my parents and friends to ask them what's the point, nobody could tell me. They had no idea because they were unconscious, which is, I would say, the antithesis of being mindful. They just had no idea. They were just doing what their parents had told them to do. They were just doing what society expects you to do. Get a job, study at university, get a degree, get a job, socialize with your friends, and get married, have kids, and then that's what life is. And why, nobody really knew. And so it perpetuated this sense of meaninglessness that then was a weight and a heaviness for me. And so depression was this kind of the weight of the world, where in order to survive you had to make money. In order to make money you really had to be involved in the world, and I just didn't see the point in being involved. And what that did was, though, it sparked in me a search for meaning. And I think this was the saving grace for me, because I became a seeker of truth, without knowing what that meant or what that was. But I wanted to know what's the truth. And I realized, and to me, what's the truth was the same as what's the point? Why are we here? And it was like following these little breadcrumbs. And what I found was that everybody wanted to be happy. I realized that even a murderer, somehow in that moment, I mean, there's mental illness and all of that kind of stuff, but somehow there's a sense that if I do this action, it'll somehow make my life better. It'll somehow give me power. It'll somehow give me control. It'll somehow uh, make me feel better. And I realized that everybody on this planet was looking for happiness. Everybody wanted to be happy. And then I noticed very few people are happy. And so this was then another thing. I was like, wow, everybody wants to be happy and nobody's happy. So what to do? And that just turned into a kind of search for what is true happiness and where does it come from? And that led me to things like Buddhism, and I really connected with the story of the Buddha waking up out of ego. And when I read that, the story of the Buddha himself, that he was suffering, unhappy, and he basically said, I'm going to sit under this tree until I find happiness.
Mm.
And I loved that. I didn't feel like I had the discipline for that, but I had a drive for that too. And then the story that he realized, his first words were life is suffering, which we basically just said. We said life is uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Same thing. Life is suffering. And so to open to that and accept that and face that
Mhm.
is the first step. And you could see, just by saying life is suffering, that's a kind of mindfulness. It's that the Buddha was practicing mindfulness somehow back then. And so then he said all suffering is rooted in this ego, this story we tell ourselves of who we think we are, and that it's possible to wake up from the ego and discover happiness and freedom. And I read that, and just something clicked. I saw that Jared was meaningless, but that when there's no Jared, when I saw through the story of Jared, what I discovered was that there was a presence here, an empty, open awareness. Life is here without a story. That birds and animals and trees, they live life without a story, and they're probably happier than most humans. And so it just connected. I got it somehow internally that to actually be myself meant to not tell a story of myself, and to actually touch life and to interact with life actually meant being, not doing. Although doing can come out of being, but it's a natural doing that feels effortless. But I didn't need to do something to get happiness. And this was mind-blowing to me. And it that it was so challenging, that reading the story of the Buddha was beautiful but not enough. And then I started to find some other teachers and some books, but finally I had to find my teacher, that I could rest at the feet of the teacher who pointed me to this timeless presence that has no name and no story, that's always here. And that just took me out of the depression completely, as I realized Jared was depressed. Jared wasn't good enough. I could list you all the ways that Jared isn't good enough. And the thing is that some of those things are true. Jared is faulty in many ways. But if I don't tell the story about it, then I'm happy, and there's a compassion and an acceptance of my body mind. That I have some bad habits, and I'm bad at doing this and that. I'm limited. This body is limited. This brain is limited. My language is limited. My capacity to even talk right now to you is limited. But who I really am is not limited. Who
Mhm.
I am is prior to this language and prior to this body, because it's the consciousness and the awareness that notices the body, that the body is inside of. And so I thought I was inside my body looking out of my eyes, until I realized that my body was inside me, and that I'm not separate to life. I'm not separate to the whole universe. How can I be? And in that, there was also an expansion, like Laura was saying, this kind of limited perspective. And when we see the world through our identity, it's a very limited perspective. And then when you are willing to go without your identity for even just a millisecond, your consciousness, it feels like your consciousness expands. Of course, your consciousness doesn't expand, it's always infinitely big, but your awareness of it expands so that you can see yourself, so that you can see your own seeing. You become aware of your own awareness.
Mm.
And that, the result for me was freedom, complete and utter freedom and bliss, that didn't change the fact that the body gets still uncomfortable, that emotions still arise, weather still comes. It's just that you realize, or I realized, I'm the sky, I'm not the cloud, I'm not the storm, I'm the sky. And so clouds come in, storms come in, and then they go. But I remain, I'm always here. And then what that did for me as well was about meaning, is that suddenly both I accepted the meaninglessness in a way of a human life, that in the context of a universe that is trillions and trillions of years old, and that a human life is like a flash in the pan, and that my particular human life, in some ways you could say, is completely meaningless. But then I saw that actually meaning for me was awakening. Meaning for me was happiness, love, freedom. That became the meaning of my life. And that meaning is so fulfilling, it's so deep, it's so beautiful, that suddenly my life went about meaninglessness and I'm terrible and I'm hopeless and nobody loves me. And the meaning of my life was, how can Jared be better so that people will love me? It suddenly became that the meaning of my life was love itself, was happiness itself, freedom itself. And that is a, you know, to have that as the meaning of your life is profound.
Mhm.
So
So beautiful, Jared.
that's the two
I love
things.
hearing it.
Just that's the two things about meaning, and about finally the truth of who we are, waking up to the truth of who we are.
And I found, when I first met Eli and Gangaji, and that's who Jared and I, that's our teachers. I was a mess at that point. My twins were 1 and my daughter was 3, and I was physically and emotionally and mentally just so exhausted, and none of those systems were stable or working. And somehow, against all odds, I had the opportunity to come and sit in satsang with them. And I wasn't expecting anything really. I think I was so caught, my attention was so caught up in what was going on, um, that I didn't even, I wasn't expecting anything, but I had this deep, unexpected realization that all of this was irrelevant. All of this that was going on in my body, not that it wasn't important or that it wasn't real, because it was there, but compared to um, the depth of consciousness and the limitlessness of that, even death in that moment of realization, I saw was a tiny drop compared to the truth of what we are.
And to see that before that realization, I imagine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, but that your mind was making a meaning out of those feelings about what that meant about you. Because that's what we do. It's like we feel an emotion and we say, this means something about me. And it's true for a thought. We have a thought and we say, this means something about me. And then it's true about our circumstances, where somebody says something and we immediately take it personally. We say, this means something about me. And honestly, that's like looking at the sky and seeing a cloud go over and saying, that cloud means something about me. Or it's raining because God is punishing me because I'm a bad person. I don't deserve it. And it's no different, because emotions, who knows where they come from? Some of them you pick up from your parents, in which case it's got nothing to do with you. Some of them are generational. So then to see that in that awakening that you spoke of, Laura, that that the meaning that you put on your experiences, that meaning disappears, and you realize that the feeling is just a feeling, and it's a drop in the ocean of consciousness.
So, Jared, I wonder, I know that a little bit later we are going to be leading people through a guided meditation, but I wonder, just as a recap or a takeaway from what you've said here, if people are wondering how to start with self inquiry, or if someone's noticing that they're in a bit of a turbulent emotional system, could you give them something like a question or something that they could use maybe in that moment that might be supportive?
I mean, to really start from the beginning, I think you have to become aware of what are the stories that you're telling yourself. And in a way, this is mindfulness. Like, you have to observe your mind and say, what am I thinking? And you can, I would actually recommend, if you want a kind of something to do, is to take a piece of paper and make like 4 columns. And on the heading on the first column is thoughts, the second column is emotions, third column is physical sensations, and the fourth column is circumstances. And at any moment, just stop and just write down, what are the thoughts I'm having right now? What is the stories I'm telling? What emotions am I feeling? What do I feel in my body? So you distinguish between the emotion and the body, very important. Some of us are completely unaware of the body, and some of us are completely unaware of the emotions. And so we might say, well, I'm not feeling an emotion, but I'm feeling heat. Well, but if you look a bit closer, you might find that that might be fear, or it might be anger, that then manifests in your body as heat. But just to write it down, what are the emotions I'm feeling? What are the physical sensations? So it might be a vibrating in my chest, or it might be a lightness in the head, or it might be heat, or tension or compression. And then what are the circumstances? It might be, oh, well, I'm lying in my bed in the morning, or it might be I'm on the train. And just write down those 4 things. And do that maybe 3 or 4 times a day for like 3 or 4 days. And just see what happens. And my recommendation is, you, at the end of the day, you take that piece of paper and either burn it, or if that's unsafe, like throw it in the bin and
Beautiful.
recycle.
I love it. That's a great exercise. Thank you.
And you'll see that this is a way of just starting to observe, how am I suffering, to be honest, and how am I what stories am I telling myself? What meaning am I giving to my emotions? And how you have your own insights about it. You start to see, oh my God, I'm retelling and retelling this story every day. Then your next step could be to ask yourself, what could happen if I stop telling any stories? What if you don't tell any stories ever again? That might sound extreme, but it is, and the world is suffering, and everybody's suffering, and I call that extreme. And so to wake up from that, you have to be a bit extreme on the other end of the scale, on the scale of happiness and love. You have to be extreme. So, what could happen if I stop telling any stories ever again? That's a powerful question.
Hmm. And I think it's really clear. I hope that it's really clear that from both of us, we're inviting a genuine inquiry. We're not promoting a philosophy or any kind of dogma. There's nothing to believe here. We're really just trying to share ways that you can open your awareness deeper in a more sharp and clear way to find out what is actually here, what's actually true. And it's up to you to discern what the deepest truth is that you can become aware of in any moment. And that's really the pathway to through all of this.
You have everything you need. You have the wisdom required to be happy and free. You have the capacity to see yourself beyond any story. And so you don't need anything from us, and you don't need anything from anybody else. Only a good mirror that reflects that back to you, rather than a mirror that reflects back your stories, which is what many friends do, is they support your story. But here you get a mirror that simply reflects that you are telling a story, not that your story is true,
Mm-hmm.
but that you are telling a story. And that's what we're here to be, as a mirror.
That's it. So I can't believe it's already been an hour. We thought that what we would love to do, if anybody has a question or a comment, you can raise your hand. There should be a little icon on your screen where you can raise your hand and feel free to ask us any questions, or you can type it in the chat. So yeah, we'll open up the lines for the next little bit here, and then we thought we would end with a guided meditation for you all.
Yeah, so we're curious how this shows up for you. Did that make sense to everybody? And did it bring up a question for you in your life?
I'm not seeing any hands yet.
It's beautiful. Must have been a very informative talk that there's no questions.
Or even, maybe even the question, how do you notice that depression is starting to set in, and what's your tendency? I do see a hand up here. Uh, and this is Ian. Go ahead, Ian. Oh, we need to unmute you. There we go.
Hi, Ian.
It's not Ian, it's actually Joanne.
Hi, Joanne.
Hi, Joanne.
You're looking at a little
But I'm here.
Question. If you're depressed, where are you? Are you in the present, or are you in the past? Are you thinking about the past, or are you thinking about the future? And how can all of this help the situation?
It's great. I would say you're always in the present, but if you're depressed, I would bet money that your mind is in the past and future. And because even just to have a story of me, which generally, if you're depressed, there'll be either a story of me, there will be a story of me, and a story of them or the world. So the world is too big or not nice, or it's like I can't do it. And that story has to come from the past. It has to. Because a story requires a past and then a present and then a future, because there's a kind of movement. But to be completely present means no story at all. For me to be with you, Joanne, right now talking, and with this group, there can't be a story going on, because that would be, my mind would be, let's say, veiling being completely present with you. So to be fully present means to have no story at all.
So there
And
has to be a story in order to be depressed.
I would bet that,
Mm,
yes.
mm,
I know. Let me stress that there are some biochemical issues that exist in the human race at this time. There are chemical imbalances in the brain, and there are personality disorders, and there's a range of things like that. And for those people who experience that, often medication and kind of therapeutic support is useful and helpful, and I recommend it if you need it. So I don't want to dismiss that, but just more of an in general, if there's not a biochemical issue, then if there's depression, there is almost certainly going to be a story about me. Which,
Something external circumstances have affected.
yes, it's all linked, like I said, your thoughts, your emotions, your physical body, and your external circumstances. And you see that, for example, there are people who have lost a limb.
Mm,
And there are some people who would lose a limb and be in a state of depression for the rest of their life, because they're thinking about what that means and how they become limited now that they've lost a limb. But then we all know that there are those people who have lost a limb who are absolutely happy and absolutely shining and living their best life. And that's the that it depends on what story you're telling. It
uh-huh.
depends on you, how you interpret your circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So that circumstances can be very bad, and you can be completely happy in the midst of it.
So I'll just finish by saying it's a story we're telling ourselves that helps us through all of this.
Or that hinders it.
Uh,
Depends on what that story is. I feel like it's so much about a relationship between us and what is arising. So if neurochemically there's a depressed state, however that manifests for you, the way that you respond, the way that you either resist it and try to manage it or fix it, or if you can just, even for a moment, be with it and not make it wrong. And this is so, it's so opposite to what we're conditioned to do. We're conditioned to fix it, to manage it, but to just turn that around and just be with it fully. There's something in that can unravel everything.
that's very good. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Joanne. So on that topic of stories, I would say it's always better to tell a good story. It's always better. If your story is a story of triumph, of happiness, you can pull yourself out of depression with a positive story that gives you meaning. And then there is a next step after that, which is to have no story at all and see what happens. Let your story end in storylessness, in presence, in pure conscious presence. Even just to take a moment for that, even right now, to take a moment of no story, just open mind, no idea, not knowing anything, didn't come from somewhere, not going anywhere, just listening, seeing, presence, and see, what does presence feel like without a story.
There's a question here from Sophia, and it says, can there be a purely chemical imbalance creating the depression? Or is it always fueled by thoughts and emotions, etc.? And how do you know when you need to treat that? And I would say, and Jared, I'm excited to hear what you have to say here too, that by committing to being very aware of what and how it's coming up for you, without putting any boundaries on that, just sharply observing, then you'll see, and you'll see those patterns when we're not telling a story about it, when we're just purely seeing it. You'll learn more about it. And if you notice and you can tell that it's chemical, I would also say go to your doctor and have conversations with, you know, with your health professionals. But I think in this vigilance to observation, um, in that, being so aware of the stories that we tell and how that can get us deeper in the rut, then the action becomes clear.
Yeah, and I'd say, everything is, we're in a big soup. It's like you can't separate anything out. You can't separate your emotions and your thoughts and your body. Emotions happen in the body. Thoughts happen in the head, let's say. And circumstances are circumstance. So I don't think you can say this is purely chemical imbalance, and this is unless you can totally, through what Laura was saying, of self-observing, and say, well, you know what, I have absolutely no story. I'm I'm totally awake and free, and I feel depressed. In which case, maybe it is purely a chemical imbalance, but only you can say that. Nobody else can tell you that. And so, to me, you tell the truth. If you feel you have a chemical imbalance, go and see a doctor, like Laura said, really. I recommend it. I've seen a lot of people benefit from seeing a doctor and getting some medication. I've seen it work very well for people for a period of time to help them get back on their feet and then get back into self-inquiry and mindfulness.
And I
But
just go ahead, Jared.
I would just finish just to say that you can also tell the truth if you are telling a story. If you are seeing the world through the lens of me and my life and what's working, what's not, and what my feelings mean to me, and am I a success or am I a failure? Am I loved or am I unlovable? Am I safe or am I unsafe? And am I secure? And you can tell the truth if those things are going on, in which case you can inquire into them. You can inquire into who am I underneath all of that. And then if there's still a kind of persistent issue, go and see a doctor.
And I was just going to add to that too, that by actively practicing mindfulness and self-compassion when it comes to our own depression, then any internal stigma that we have against it, any sense of shame, or this shouldn't be happening, or it's somehow my fault, or if I was just stronger and could get my stuff together, then so this practice helps get underneath all of that. So once you can become aware of those things, if you are believing those things and work with them, then yes, if there's still something going on, I mean, I notice in this body mind, I'm constantly playing with my diet or caffeine, or just to make sure, if I feel that I'm depressed or a little bit physically lower, then I take action to make sure that that day I eat really well. And there's no problem with that. There's nothing holding me back from taking care of this body mind. There's another question here. Thank you so much, Sophia.
Thank you.
And there's another question here. It says, any tips on how to tell the difference between depression and having too much to do and feeling stuck? Or are they the same?
My first response to that is getting caught up in the labeling of it. Is that, we use this word depression, but I bet you there are definitions out there that I probably don't even know, and there are experts on depression that will tell you this is what it means if you to have depression, and anything outside of that is not depression. And so I don't want to get caught in the labeling part, because for me it doesn't matter, in the sense that if you have too much to do and feeling stuck, I would say to be mindful of what are you, what like, what is underneath having too much to do, and feel, what does feeling stuck mean to you? So is your relationship to what you have to do a kind of story or feeling that it's overwhelming and too much to do? And what's your response to that? How do you deal with that? Do you work harder and then get more exhausted, or do you shut down? And to, again, to really observe yourself and observe, what is my internal state and what are the stories that I'm telling myself. And then to see that if you don't personalize it, so if there's no story of me, then you can show up and you can then, if there's too much to do less. Say no. And maybe there's an issue with saying no, and maybe that's what you mean by feeling stuck, that you can't say no, and so you say yes to everything, then you have too much to do and you feel stuck. But only through inquiry and let's say in mindfulness can you actually recognize that, what am I doing here if I'm not a victim? So have I chosen to do this and taken on all this stuff? And then what's my relationship to that? Am I then resisting that or fighting that or judging that or suffering from it? So I would take the emphasis off the label and use what we're saying as an inquiry into what's going on for you, whether it's called depression or called feeling stuck. That's my personal viewpoint on it.
And just to be transparent about this, when I get overwhelmed and feel myself getting stressed out, because of my practice in self-inquiry, now I can stop and say, okay, why have I let myself, how did I get here? And what am I trying to prove? Is there someone here that's trying to prove her worth in some way? And as soon as I can see that, because there is, in those moments, there is, then it just, this humility and this deep realization that it's never, our worth isn't proved by what we do or even how we show up. It's much more real than that. So watch out for that overwhelmed and then feeling paralyzed by that. I know that pattern so well, and there's a deeper truth underneath that, and I give so much support. It looks like there's another hand up here. Oh,
I think it went down again.
did it go down? It did.
We have
Okay.
a koi questioner. Well, maybe it's a good time. Oh, there we go.
This
We
is
have Helen.
Helen. Hi, Helen. Oops, I'm trying to unmute you. There you go. Hi, Helen.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to say that, yeah, I have had depression off and on for decades, really. And I never used medication until it became really serious. And that was when my whole life did actually fall apart on a whole series of levels. And I was in menopause. And so actually my hormonal imbalance at that time was really toppled by what was going on in my emotions. And when my hormonal balance was already out of whack. And so medication was incredibly important to me at that time and sort of saved my life, really. And I was on it for years, but that kept me sort of humming along until I got to a place where I felt that I could gradually come off the medication, and then I did. And then I would still sort of go in and out. But when I became aware that it was the story that was running the depression, like the big story, then, and Eli really helped me to see that. And then I could just stop the story. I could stop listening to the story. And I still have to do that sometimes. The story will still come back and kind of tap me on the shoulder, but it's a lot easier to just not listen to it. And I find it's really as simple as changing the thought. It's like just don't listen to that thought. Just don't buy that thought.
Mm.
And I just either change the thought or just focus on something else, and it stops. So, and then I don't cycle into that depression again. So my point is that I think there are times when our hormonal imbalance and our life circumstances can be too challenging, and that's when maybe we do need that pharmaceutical support. And then when we get to a place where we're ready, we can stop doing that. But the whole thing around the story is just the most significant thing for me in turning it all around. So, and I don't need medication anymore.
Oh, that's such good news, Helen. I'm so happy. How powerful, how liberating.
Yes, it has been incredibly liberating. It's, what Eli said to me changed my life. So, yeah, just wanted to say that.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
Thanks, Helen. So one last message here before Jared, I think will lead a meditation. This message is from Sarah. She says, I just want to say thank you to all of you for sharing your time and energy, sharing your vulnerability and experiences. Gracias. Deep gratitude. Thank you,
Thank
Sarah.
you. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Very sweet. Okay, so we're going to finish the meeting with just a little guided meditation, and really just a way to kind of integrate everything and let you feel it experientially as well. So um, I think this is the point where maybe we're going to just say, if anybody feels interested in following up, if you want to um, get some private kind of support in mindfulness with Laura, or self-inquiry with me, we're both available, and we make ourselves available. And there's a range of ways that you can follow up with resources online and just get in touch.
Definitely. And after this webinar, I think tomorrow you'll each receive an email that has a link to this recording. And also just I'll send you Jared's and my info so you know how to find us. And we're running a course this summer together too. So there's information in the email about that as well. We'd love you to join us.
Okay, so just starting off by getting comfortable in your chair and just making any adjustments that you need to be totally comfortable and at peace. And if you're not comfortable in some area, you can just use that as an entry point to actually maybe even close your eyes if you feel comfortable to do that, and to drop your attention into the place where you might feel some discomfort or some tension. And just notice how your attention can actually go all the way into this place and all the way through. Isn't that amazing? And that can just be a signal that the one who is noticing all of this, in this moment, you have full permission to stop everything and to just let yourself drop inside yourself.
And as
Very
you
deep.
sense your own presence, you might just want to offer a gesture, putting one hand over your heart or just putting a hand on your knee, just offering support and presence inwards. So as you bring your attention to any discomfort or anything that's here, you're doing it from a place of deep interest and support.
And you might notice that your own attention has certain qualities, and that quite naturally, without trying to be compassionate, you might notice that your attention has a certain flavor of compassion. And without trying to be kind, you might notice that your attention has already inherent in it a certain essential kindness. And without trying to be pure, you might notice that just your attention, as it navigates through your body, as it drops inside, that your attention has a certain natural purity to it.
And there's a way that you can even turn your attention even deeper into this kindness this awareness that's here, that you are, it's inherently your capacity. And you can just allow yourself to fall into it, be held by it.
And as you fall down inside yourself, I wonder if you can just notice how certain things can drop away. How maybe any thoughts about the past can drop away. Any thoughts about what you have to do later can fall away quite naturally as you fall into your own presence, into your body, into your mind, and into something even deeper than both of those. So that the deeper you fall into yourself and the more in touch with your experience right now, you notice that you don't need a past and you don't need a future just in this moment to experience what you're experiencing.
And in the same way, if there's an emotion present, or if there has been an emotion present, you might notice that you have the capacity to simply be with it without resolving it or fixing it, putting it into a small container. That if you just allow yourself to be present and fully aware, even if that emotion is here, there's more than enough room for it.
And I wonder if you can fall even deeper and find yourself observing the story of your life. Just imagine that you're floating in space, and underneath you, starting from your birth all the way to the present moment, and maybe even you can notice a faint outline of the future. You can notice your own timeline, your own story of your life. And you notice that there were ups and there were downs. Notice how few ups and downs there are and how most of it was just nothing really going on. And just see your timeline almost like as a graph of ups and downs, of pains and happinesses and successes and failures. Specific moments where you found a partner and breakups and maybe kids, and just see it all underneath you. And you can just observe it. And what would happen if you imagine that coming out of your heart was a light, kind of, I don't know what kind of light, maybe a golden light, let's say. And this golden light is unconditional love. And I want you to imagine that unconditional love, which is love that has no conditions, just love. I want you to imagine that that love pours out of your heart, maybe in the form of this golden light, and it can start to flood your timeline, flood your story. So that unconditional love starts to move into all of these places, all of these events, into the times when nothing was going on, into the good times, the bad times, everything. And what happens to your story of who you think you are and the story of your life if you flood it with unconditional love, almost like a gift, giving your past and your story a gift of unconditional love? Maybe you can see yourself as a little girl or a little boy, and you can flood that whole area with unconditional love. And maybe you're a teenager going through a angsty period. And what if you flood that period with unconditional love. And just notice how this unconditional love changes your story, how it softens and loosens everything up. And I wonder if you can imagine that you flood your story so fully with this unconditional love that it all starts to melt. It all starts to disappear, dissolving into love. So that instead of a story and a timeline, what's left is just pure unconditional love. Now, I don't know what that would be like for you. And you can just imagine that right now. What would happen if instead of a story, there was pure unconditional love? And in that, you might have an insight. You might realize something very important. I don't know what that is, but maybe you could realize something as your story of who you think you are, of your past, present, and future, can be dissolved in pure unconditional love. What do you realize?
And maybe if there's something that you realized at some point in our time together today, maybe some way that you can attack yourself or make yourself wrong, I wonder if from this place of deep, unconditional love, if there's some insight or something you can offer to yourself in those moments.
You can find out, what do I need? What do I need in that moment? And you can give it to yourself. It's so simple. All it requires is your attention, which means you're all qualified. So you can let your attention come back up to the surface. And at some point you can maybe rub your fingers together and move your toes around. And you can open your eyes when you're ready, but you can stay internally, stay in this deeper place, this quiet place of no story, of unconditional love. So that eyes open, eyes closed, it doesn't matter. There's no difference. And we just want to say thank you so much for your willingness to take the time and be here. We're so grateful.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Jared.
Bye, everyone.